Okay, the results from ABBYY's State of Intelligent Automation GenAI Confessions 2025 survey revealed challenges in implementing generative AI. Was that a surprise, or largely what you were anticipating from the survey?
No, it wasn't really a surprise, to be honest. If you look at the survey itself, about 89% of our respondents were very positive, but they did admit that it was a lot more challenging than they would have hoped for or expected. I think this is typical of what you see with a hype cycle. We had one, you know, continue on for quite some time now, and people are now getting into the realization that technology, whichever new technology it is never a true silver bullet. And we saw this in different areas. One was about 31% of business leaders found it to be quite difficult to train Gen AI models and was much harder than expected. And 28% said that the tools were difficult to integrate into their business processes. Now, this has a very particular thing that is definitely trending right now in the market. I say trending because it's becoming quite a level of awareness and increased awareness within the market right now, is that you can't really introduce just new technology into broken processes, right? That is the realization that everybody is starting to make. And that is why the results were not that surprising, but it is now becoming a realization that if you don't fix the broken process and you just introduce technology, you're not actually going to change anything within your organization.
Okay, and in terms of you mentioned a couple of the sort of challenges or the reasons behind the sort of challenges people are facing. So I think the survey lists staff not having the necessary skills. Then you mentioned about the sort of training of the Gen AI models is harder than people thought. The integration part you mentioned, and then also just staff misusing the tools and our old friend, shall I say, not Shadow AI, but Shadow IT obviously existed. And now we've got Shadow AI. So yeah, just maybe you can say a little bit more about some or all of those sort of challenges that people reported on.
Yeah, of course. So it's definitely the skill gap is I think the main one to tackle, right? That is the main challenge because a lot of people underestimate how quickly technology is moving right now. Every single day, there's a new model, there's a new capability, there's a new feature, and if you understand all of it and you know how to work with it, it makes you incredibly powerful as a user to be able to leverage that technology. Nonetheless, that is only a small percentage of everybody in the workforce that is able to keep up with that. I track everything that's happening in terms of artificial intelligence at the moment, and even I have trouble, and it's my day job trying to keep up with all of the new things and the changes that are happening. And most of all, it's not so much keeping up with the changes, it's making sure that you understand them enough so you can actually make them have an impact. Because technology for the sake of technology is never the answer. So having that level of training and making your workforce, able to actually keep up with that is one of the main complexities. It's for that reason that, for example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually said that there's a projected growth of about 17% driven largely by AI advancements to fill that skill gap, demand for Gen AI expertise or just general AI expertise, as again, the realization kicks in more and more that it's not just Gen AI, it's not just agentic, it's not just symbolic AI. So all the different kind of technologies do have to work together to get to a place that for your business, this will actually mean a change. And you're not just spending money on expensive tools, even though they are getting more and more commoditized, but they're still not making that big of an impact. We see this also by the fact that a lot of organizations have seen limited impact from Gen AI specifically through copilots and other tools, simply because it's all focused on personal productivity and not so much on really truly changing the process within the organization that can have that ROI that you say, well, that's pretty stellar.
Okay, and the overall result seems to be that organizations are looking at other types of AI technology to help address some of the challenges we've talked about, and mainly through the use of agentic AI, process intelligence, document AI, and RAG or retrieval augmented generation. So yeah, please tell us a little bit more about what's going on there.
Yeah, so I think if you look at how the technology has developed itself and how it's kind of went into different parts of the organization. um, a lot of organizations already had capabilities around automation, right? You had RPA and other tools, iPaaS, that were able to automate quite kind of linear processes quite easily. And they were already supplemented by additional tools such as Document AI to be able to understand documents of any kind of complexity. Already the principle of process intelligence or process AI was there simply because you still had to map out how a process actually worked. So even if it was a linear one or not too complex, you still had to understand it before you could go implement it in these tools. Now, with GenAI, we basically created the brain that was able to think and reason through, okay, good. What is a good solution to this particular business problem or this business processes? What is the next decision or next step that I have to take? So it was kind of the predecessor to then making Gen AI, actually agentic AI possible, because the brain, without any kind of limbs or hands or tools to use, would actually not make a lot of sense because it was all theoretical. They could tell you what to do, but then you actually had to go find a way to do it yourself. So that's truly what agentic AI is, where you combine the ability to reason and then the ability to leverage tools within the same system, which then allows you to then actually take action, not just think and not just have the Gen AI component through an LLM think about what needs to happen and explain what needs to happen, but then have the ability to actually call tools so that you can actually go take those actions. Now, all of this is kind of like a next evolution of what RPA was, what automation has already been within these organizations, and the similar tools are there as well. So that's why you correctly mentioned document AI, process intelligence, retrieval augmented generation. It's all about getting the data out of the places where it has value and getting them into the next place where it actually needs to take an action. Now, the thing with agentic AI, and when this is really interesting to see, is that it has even further, I would say, noted the importance of truly understanding your processes. And I'll tell you why. When you think about an agent making decisions of how to take the next step within the process, that is a massive level of importance that you actually allow an automated system to take, right? There's no more humans involved. There can be, but a lot of organizations are trying to get to that level where everything does happen automatically. And that comes with a lot of implications. What if the agent gets it wrong? What if it hallucinates? What if it changes a zero into a one? Or it adds a couple of zeros on that invoice that it's trying to process and getting through your AP system. Everything can have a very large impact. So this is where, again, the power of the combination of several technologies have to work together to get to a level of where it can actually have a huge outcome for an organization. This is also the thing that I've seen, and been told by quite a few of our customers that said, well, as much as we love the concept of agentic AI and will continue to grow and be super important for organizations, you have to look at the right process of where to apply it. If you have a very linear process, there is no point whatsoever in trying to employ agentic automation to fill that gap. If your process changes on the fly, I'm thinking about an onboarding use case, for example, where customers might be required to offer deliver different kinds of information, different kinds of onboarding mechanisms, different channels, all of that. That is incredibly complex, but that is where agentic AI can shine because it can look at that complexity and decide, okay, my next best thing that I can do to get to the end result, which is onboarding this customer, it can decide for itself what is going to be most efficient in that process. But the continuous monitoring of what those agents actually do is also a very important part of it because if you can't prove that to the in terms of compliance, the actual legislations that are coming into effect, that is a key component of it because if you cannot, you will get into trouble like in a couple of years pretty quickly as more and more AI legislation comes into effect.
Okay, so as you've outlined there, it's a sort of combination of AI technologies that brings success and the benefit. What are the benefits? If you get it right, what are the business benefits? How big an impact can successful combination of agentic
Yeah.
AI, Gen AI, etc. What can it achieve?
It can make a huge difference. I love to give the example of one of our customers, a global fast food chain that was dealing with a compliance use case. There was regulatory changes, and they had to offer compliance to a next level. And this actually meant that for each and every lease contract that they had to be able to identify about 350 data points out of those contracts. That is a lot of information. And this was, again, this is a compliance use case. They had to supply that information. Now, they actually, had to pivot quickly. So they started with having people trying to do this process. But if you think about a lease agreement, a lease contract, this is a very heavy document, and this is about corporate leases. So this is 500 pages or more of information inside of a single document. The interesting bit was that as they were having about 30 FTEs doing this process, they only had about 60% accuracy in a compliance use case. So that's not a great result, because this meant they have to go back and explain why you got it wrong, weren't in compliance. So it created a lot of overhead. Then they introduced technology. So they introduced indeed a perfect combination of document AI, automation, and everything else that we've talked about so far. And they were able to get to an amazing 85% with only 5 FTEs. So you had a cost reduction, but you actually had an increase in compliance, which also meant that everybody was happy. The regulators were happy, the company was happy, they had less overhead, and actually you could go back and take those people into something that was meaningful, that they could actually have an even further impact on the organization. Because this is never about making sure that we create more redundancies within an organization. No, whatever we see that our customers are able to actually make these types of ROIs, these types of results, they are happily moving these people to another area of the organization, or take those experiences that they had and really changing this process and duplicating that in other parts of the organization. So in turn, now they're getting up to, after about a couple of months of being in production, they've been able to get to 95%. And this is now just 5 FTEs, 95% of straight through compliance, and that is amazing results. So this ROI, for example, is simply staggering, because they were able to do this. I think we had about 3 months of implementation, 3 months of additional training that had to happen, and now they're at this perfect kind of percentage, and they're extremely happy. So this is when it kind of comes to using the right combination, because what the caveat to this entire story is, they tried to do it with just GenAI before, and they could only get to 70%, which was still an increase, but it wasn't meaning that they were extremely happy with the results. They expected a lot more. And I think all of that is reflected throughout the results of our survey, that people had very high expectations, but came to quite a cold realization. And that's why they're admitting, like, yes, we're all using it, but we're still trying to find ways that we can actually make it very useful and have a true impact on the organization. But again, once you start combining it with the right technologies and implementing it in the right way, thinking about changing the process, that's when the magic really starts to happen.
Okay, and in terms of making it happen, how easy is it, or what needs to happen in terms of putting together and implementing a strategy that combines Gen AI with the other types of AI we've talked about? I mean, is there a sort of standard set of rules that everyone can use, or does it very much vary from application to application and company to company? What can you tell us as to how easy or not it is in terms of coming up with a strategy, a successful strategy?
Well, in terms of a strategy, our main recommendation is always that there is no AI without PI. So there is no artificial intelligence without process intelligence. You've heard me say this a couple of times already throughout the last 20 minutes, but understanding your process, that is where it really always starts. This has been kind of true ever since automation came into play. This has been kind of true ever since we started industrializing the way we make things, the way we do things. It's actually even true if you go back all the way to farming. If you understand how the process works or how it should work, you would just become much more efficient, and you can start to industrialize and automate a lot of the things within the process. This is, I would say, the key giveaway that I would have for anybody that looking to start on this journey, looking how to leverage GenAI, agentic automation. Start with understanding the process. Start with using process intelligence to help you with that mapping. Because if you try to do a manual exercise, and this is a wonderful example that I love talking about every single time, is if you ask the 10 people that are active within the process, and you tell them, give me a path of how you get from A to Z and how this actually works. Each of them will either give you a different answer, or they will all give you the same answer. But then if you start to look at the actual data, you'll see that there's 100 different answers to how a process gets executed. And this is always eye-opening for whenever we present this to customers visually, because that is what we were able to do with our technology. So once you actually highlight this and you see that only 10% of your process follows the path it's supposed to follow, and if you're not in, this could oftentimes this is also about compliance. You have to follow this type of path. If you know that now suddenly 90% of the time it's not doing that, a lot of light bulbs start flashing quite quickly. So that is the starting point. And then the technology will be able to kind of point itself out once you understand and you see when you implement it, you automate a certain step, you make a certain step go faster. It can also have impacts downstream. The more that you can predict this, you can also gonna get closer to predicting your ROI, and then at the end of it, truly proving it. If you take this kind of first step of not going technology first, but actually going process first, that makes a big difference down the line.
Okay, and in terms of real world example, I mean, you've already shared one. I don't know if there are any others um, in terms of how organizations have used it. And then I mean, is there a typical engagement, I guess, with a customer? Do they normally come to you when they have this dissatisfaction with Gen AI and it's not working? What do we need to do? Or do some of them just say, right, we need to do it, so we're going to approach yourselves, help us through it, or
It,
yeah, just anything you can share as to sort
yeah,
of how
it does
customers go
vary.
about it and the various paths
Yeah,
to success.
it does vary, I have to be honest. I think we're getting at the a little bit more towards the end of the hype cycle where a lot of people have already come to the realization or they've shared enough about the realization that it doesn't just work out of the box, meaning that organizations that are starting on this journey or a little bit more cautious will kind of go directly to, okay, I'm going to find a technology partner that I can work with who understands this technology, who understands how this is supposed to go, has had those successes, can prove those successful outcomes, because that is the other thing, we've talked about. You mentioned shadow AI, but there's also AI washing. There's agentic AI washing where everybody suddenly says, we are AI, we are agentic. And I think that is the main takeaway that a lot of organizations are now looking for. Okay, that's great. You have the technology, you could make these claims, but can you prove it with customers? Like the story I just talked about. Another great one that we were able to help quite quickly was when the whole regulatory changes happened with Brexit, for example. We see it now with the tariffs as well from the US. It's a very heavy strain on the entire logistics and supply chain. And one of our customers actually had the issue that they were working with fast-moving consumer goods. In this particular instance, incredibly tasty cakes that they had to ship from the UK into Europe. But of course, with the changes in regulations, now they were sitting much longer in the warehouses because they had a much lengthier process in terms of customs clearance. So it was taking days in some instances because, again, as you can imagine, these are foods. This is very perishable. So we had to change that. We introduced technology to help them with that and taking that down from days to just mere up to sometimes, 1 hour is the max. We actually are now working towards minutes. So that's a massive kind of help that we were able to introduce, and that actually created this opportunity for them by leveraging technology to expand because they were now able to do it a lot faster. They don't have that roadblock anymore. So it comes back to, is there a kind of blueprint for everybody? I don't think so. It really comes down to, again, the process that you're looking at that will help you find the right type of technology to work with. But the only true recommendation that I can give in terms of, what should everybody do is really look at vendors that provide outcomes that can actually tell you these types of stories that I've told you today. And actually don't just say, well, great, we have agentic, we have AI, it's going to solve every problem. I love the fact when I can go to a customer and can tell them, I'm going to give you the most beautiful regular expression that will give you 100% accuracy every single time. I said this to a group of data scientists once, and they actually had to think what a regular expression was because they had forgotten, because they created this tunnel vision because of all the hype around the technology itself. But sometimes it's the simplest solution that will actually offer you the best results.
Okay, so I guess that the message is for folks that it sounds like the majority are not getting all they expected from Gen AI is to sort of take a pause, have a bit of a reset, engage with folks like yourselves, rather than think, oh, Gen AI isn't working for me, it was overhyped. So it's just being a bit more realistic as to expectations, and then putting in place a proper strategy as opposed to rushing ahead. Is that
Correct.
right? Yeah, that's no problem.
Absolutely. Perfect summary.
Okay. Uh, well, I hope you got to have some of those tasty cakes at some stage. Did you? Or...
I did, yes. And the beautiful thing about working in this branch of technology is that we can work with so many different clients. It goes from lease contracts to cakes to cars to parts. And I think what I love the most about the fact is that when you can really, we also have customers in healthcare, research. And even though we are oftentimes, again, in the grander scheme of things, a small piece of the puzzle, but if you're able to accelerate some of these things, accelerate research, and have a true impact down the line, that makes it really wonderful to be able to talk about these kind of instances. So, thank you for that.
No, thanks. I mean, it's been great to chat, and thanks so much for sharing some brilliant insights into what's going on and what's causing people a lot of stress at the moment. So, Max, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip.